Hey everybody, it's GGB. Today we're going to be getting into the Friday games. Let's go! Friday college football. 7 o'clock we got Central, obviously. I've been doing Central the entire time, but if you're new to the channel, it's always in Central because I'm tired of people doing Eastern when Central is the coolest time zone. Eastern time zone is for losers. What a bunch of losers. Central time zone is the coolest time zone, so I'm going to do it in Central. We have number 5, Iowa traveling to Maryland. Iowa's only favored by 3.5 points this game on FS1. By the way, what was the last time you saw a top 5 team? Sure, they're traveling somewhere else, but they're only favored by 3.5 points against an unranked opponent. Because I've never seen that. Like, never before in my life have I seen, like, the 5th ranked team. Oh, they're traveling to an unranked team. Obviously, only 3.5 points spread. What? I think Iowa's a little bit underrated this year, but, yeah, it's just me. So how has Iowa's season gone so far? Let's do a season in review. They started out the season with obviously a phenomenal win. They had a 34-6 win over then number 17 Indiana, sure, at home. Then they traveled to then number 9 Iowa State. Now both these teams are outside of the top 25 now, but they were big wins at the time. They won 27-17 at Iowa State. Then they had the 30-7 win over Kent State. And they had the 24-14 win over Colorado State. Obviously, that Colorado State game was a little bit embarrassing if you're a Hawkeyes fan, because the Rams held it close, and the Rams lost to freaking Vanderbilt. So, obviously, not a good football team. But, on the bright side, if you're Iowa, you did win, right? Like, you didn't lose. There are multiple top 10 teams that lost last week. 2 top 10 teams lost last week. Many top 25 teams lost last week. It was a crazy week for college football. You should be lucky to survive. If you survive, you should feel an absolute amount of gratitude. You should be like, oh, thank God, because we survived. It was survival. Doesn't have to be flashy. You have to win. Spencer Petras in that game went 15-23 for 224 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Tyler Goodson had 18 carries for 57 yards. I think that's a large reason why Colorado State was able to keep this game close, is they basically said, hey, Spencer Petras, beat us with your arm. We're going to make sure Tyler Goodson cannot run for an insane amount of yards against us. And it somewhat worked. He kept the game close. And Keegan Johnson, their leading receiver only had 2 receptions. I believe their only receiver, they only had one receiver have 4 catches. So it was a very even day spreading the football around. He had 2 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown. Maryland, on the other hand, last week had a very good week, and they've only had one possession game. Iowa has played in 0 one-possession games, by the way. Actually, Maryland has had 2 one-possession games so far out of 4. Everyone remembers their Week 1 win over West Virginia. They had a 30-24 win against West Virginia. Very good game. It was a great game to watch. Then they had a absolute dominating win over Howard. Obviously, this is what you expect when you're playing Howard. It's a 62-0 win over Howard. Then the next week they followed that up with a little bit of a stinker. They did not play well. They ended up with an escaping 20-17 win at Illinois. So they were able to survive there. And then last week they ended up having a 21-point win over Kent State at home. So they're playing another game at home. They've only played one game on the road, really. So that's an interesting thing for Maryland. We'll see what happens when they start going on the road more, because that one road game was against Illinois, not a very good football team right now, and they almost lost to them. So we'll see how they do on the road, especially when they have to travel to places like Beaver Stadium. Taulia Tagovailoa last week went 31-41 though, threw for 384 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. This is what you expect though when you're playing Kent State, but it was a good warm-up game for this game. Tayon Fleet Davis, their running back, had 7 carries for 60 yards, 2 touchdowns, so a very good day on the ground for him. And Dante Demas Jr. had 4 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown. So, this is an interesting football game. By the way, Iowa's 2-1 against Maryland all time. They've only played 3 times, and Iowa has a 2-game win streak, so take that as you will. This is a really interesting game, and a game I will 100% be watching tonight, because you have the Hawkeyes, top 5 team, very good defensive team. They can run the ball efficiently, but I think Colorado State laid out a little bit of a game plan on how to keep a game close. Now, obviously, Colorado State couldn't pull it out in the end because they have severely less talent than Iowa, but Maryland is somewhat close in the talent department with Iowa. And if you follow the same kind of, you got to stop Goodson. If you can stop Goodson, you can force Petrus to throw the football, then I think you could possibly win this football game from Maryland. There's a reason why I think this spread's only 3.5 points. It's because a lot of people are a little bit low on Iowa after that game against Colorado State. Now, how much of that was, obviously, Iowa didn't play well, but also, if you look at it, a lot of teams have this, where they have a little bit of a stinker the week before against a bad football team. It's because they're saving all their stuff. They start game scheming. Maybe they don't look at Colorado State film and they start looking at Maryland film 2 weeks ahead of time instead of planning for Colorado State. Maybe instead of calling interesting play calls on offense and actually being creative, they just go with a bland, generic offense, so they have some. They don't want to give film to Maryland, and they have some special stuff prepared for Maryland. Maybe on defenses you don't bring blitzes, so you can save weird blitzes for Maryland to throw Tagovailoa Tagovailoa off his game. I think that does happen in college football. Sometimes it works. Like, for instance, against Ohio State, against Akron, Ohio State didn't play their starting quarterback, so they could give them bland, generic offense. They can still win with bland, generic offense because they're Ohio State and they're playing Akron. It almost didn't work out for Iowa, though. It was very scary game for Iowa. I still think this is Iowa's game to win. I think Maryland's a top 25 team, which is why I think this game's going to be ridiculously close. But I do think Iowa is the best team, one of the best, definitely top 2 teams in the Big Ten right now. You can argue Penn State. I think Iowa's going to win this one, and I think it's going to be by more than 3.5. 8 o'clock, we got number 13 BYU traveling to Utah State. BYU is only favored by 9.5 points in this game on CBS Sports Network. So let's look at BYU's season so far, because they have defeated 3 Power 5 opponents, 3 Pac-12 opponents, because they are an independent team. They're going to play teams not in their conference because they don't have really a conference. They just bounce around from conference to conference. They started out their season with a barely win. One of their 2 one-possession wins. They had a 24-16 win over Arizona, which is interesting now looking back on it because, again, they were playing Arizona. Arizona kind of sucks. So the fact that it was only an 8-point win is kind of weird considering how good BYU has been this year. They had a 26-17 win over number 21 Utah, which was a huge upset at the time, but now looking back on it, because Utah was ranked 21st in the nation, not a huge upset. And then they won 27-17 against number 19 Arizona State, who Arizona State has looked like a very good football team outside of that one game. So that is a good win for BYU on its record. Then they had the 35-27 game against South Florida, which is very disconcerting if you're a BYU fan, because USF does not have a good football team right now. So it's like, don't really want bad. No, I do not want USF giving them a close game. But last game, Baylor Romney, their quarterback, did have a good game. He went 20 of 25, threw for 305 yards and 3 touchdowns. Tyler Algier had 15 carries for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns, and their receiver, Gunnar Romney, replacing Dax Milne from last year, had 5 receptions for 119 yards and a touchdown. Now, Utah State, on the other hand, had a very good start to the season. Unfortunately, they had a fall from grace last week against Boise State, but this is hoping to be a bounce-back game. They ended up with a good win week 1. They ended up having a huge 26-23 victory at Washington State, so they have a win against a Power 5 opponent. Then they went on to the next week and destroyed North Dakota, a 48-24 victory. And then they had a 49-45 win at Air Force. Air Force at that point was undefeated, so it was a very good win there. Fortunately for them, they ended up playing a 1-2 Boise State team that looked possibly beatable, but they got absolutely crushed 27-3. But it is Boise State. Boise State has had almost everyone in the Mountain West's number outside of Fresno State for a long time. Boise State has been that dominant force in the Mountain West. But how'd their quarterback do? Logan Bonner, the transfer from Arkansas State, which is interesting. Utah State hired a new head coach and they got their quarterback, Logan Bonner. If you did not know, Arkansas State's head coach decided to leave Arkansas State and go to Utah State, and he brought his starting quarterback along with him, Logan Bonner. Logan Bonner has had before that game looked phenomenal, but obviously his stats last game was not good. He threw for 11, went 11 to 25, threw for 173 yards and 2 interceptions. Calvin Tyler Jr., the running back, had a good day on the ground, which is you need to get the ball more to him. He had 20 carries for 126 yards. And Brandon Bowling had 4 receptions for 62 yards. Obviously not the best day through the air for him. How's BYU against Utah State normally? BYU is 49-37 against Utah State all time, and they have a 1-game win streak. So BYU has dominated this series most of the time, but still Utah State could get a huge win to get back in this thing. I think this is going to be an interesting game. Unfortunately, I do not have CBS Sports Network, so I'm not going to be able to watch it, but I did think if you do have it, this is an interesting and really good possible game to watch. Logan Bonner, despite the stats I read to you, is still a very good quarterback in a Mountain West conference. BYU is still a top 15 team, and it's going to be interesting. I think this game is going to be way closer than a lot of people expect it to be. Again, 9.5-point spread indicates that while it's still 9.5 points, and that is still like winning by 10 points covers, this is still a top 15 team, and it's showing how much respect they have for Utah State in this game. This is the first game, by the way, BYU's going on the road for. All their other games have been at home. So first game on the road for BYU. It's going to be interesting. I think I'm going to take Utah State to cover, but BYU to win.